Thanks for joining us today for Jennifer Schaus and Associates in our Webinar Wednesday program. We are coming to you live from Washington, D.C. Our webinars are every Wednesday and are provided complimentary. They are recorded and can be downloaded from our website and YouTube channel, which now holds over 400 of our government contracting webinars. In the interest of time, we do not take questions. So if you do have questions for our speaker, we'll have his information on the last slide of the presentation today. And a special thanks to our educational sponsor, the National Veteran Small Business Coalition, for making these webinars possible. The NVSBC is the largest nonprofit trade association for veterans, and you can visit their website for more information. Okay, and now a little bit about us. We work with U.S. federal government contractors, including product, service, and software firms. Our services range from market analysis reports to contract vehicles and compliance, and more information is on our website. We also have opportunities for your organization to advertise in our newsletter. We now reach over 21,100 subscribers, and this includes both contractors and government. Contact us for pricing information with the email shown on your screen. As noted, we now have over 400 webinars in our archives. As we continue to educate federal contractors, I would like to bring your attention to our webinar schedule for 2021. The full schedule and speakers are all confirmed now. First up is a monthly series called the GovCon Live Q&A Cafe. This is a live webinar series held each month. These will take place on the second Friday of each month in 2021 at 12 p.m. Eastern. We have assembled a group of 4 panelists who are subject matter experts on a specific federal contracting topic. The panelists will make a short presentation about the topics listed here on your screen and then take your live questions about that topic. So for example, January will kick off with our panelists covering CMMC on Friday, January 8th. Our panelists include attorneys, consultants, and other industry professionals, and you can sign up on the website under Q&A Cafe tab. And sponsorships are available, and you can email hello@jenniferschaus.com for a media kit with pricing details. Okay, and in our second webinar series in 2021, we will be covering each part of the DFARS, or Defense Federal Acquisition Regulations. Similar to our current FAR series, this will be a weekly series dedicated to defense contracting, its rules, and specific regulations. This series is complimentary and will be held on Wednesdays at 12 p.m. Eastern. We will run through the parts sequentially, which means we'll start the year with DFARS Part 201 and finish with Parts 252 at the end of the year. You can sign up on our website under the DFAR tab. And again, sponsorships are available, and you can email hello@jenniferschaus.com for a media kit with pricing details. Okay, and now to introduce our speaker, Tim Furin. Welcome, Tim. We are glad to have you here with us today, and I'll turn the floor over to you.
Well, thank you, Hunter. Good afternoon, everybody. My name is Tim Furin, and I'm a partner at the law firm of Ward & Berry in Washington, D.C. I focus my practice on federal government contracting and have over 17 years of experience both as a government attorney and as an attorney in private practice. Today we're going to talk about some strategies for successfully navigating small business set-asides. We're going to focus this webinar on 4 different areas. First, we're going to talk about basic eligibility requirements. Second, we're going to talk about finding and winning government contracts. Third, we're going to talk about identifying and handling issues that arise during contract formation. And fourth, we're going to talk about identifying and handling issues that arise during contract performance. We're also going to briefly talk about some of the things that a small business should consider as they plan for future growth. The bottom line is the Ward & Berry team wants you to be successful, and we want to be a part of your success. Before we get started, I think it's important to discuss 2 basic concepts. First, what is a small business? The Small Business Administration sets numerical definitions or size standards for every for-profit small business in the United States. Size standards define the largest size a business can be to participate in government contracting programs and compete for contracts reserved or set aside for small businesses. Size standards vary by industry and are generally based on the number of employees or the amount of annual receipts a business has. Second, what is a set-aside contract? To help provide a level playing field for small businesses, the government limits competition for certain contracts to only small businesses. These contracts are called small business set-asides, and they're used by the government to help small businesses compete for and win federal contracts. The current goal of the Small Business Administration is to set aside 23% of all federal contracts exclusively for small businesses. Next slide, please. And we can go ahead and jump ahead to the next one as well. What are the basic requirements for small businesses to be eligible to compete for government contracts that are set aside exclusively for small businesses? First, a small business contractor will need to obtain the proper registrations and identification numbers. These include an employee identification number, or an EIN, which is obtained from the IRS and used for tax purposes. A DUNS number, which is a unique 9-digit identification number assigned by Dun & Bradstreet, and in some cases, a contractor will also need to obtain a CAGE code, which is a separate 5-digit identification number assigned by the Defense Logistics Agency. Next, a small business contractor will need to meet the applicable size standards. The Small Business Administration assigns a size standard to each NAICS code. NAICS codes classify businesses based on the product or service they supply. A business will generally have only one primary NAICS code, but it can also have multiple NAICS code if it sells multiple products and services. Generally, most manufacturing companies with 500 employees or less, and most non-manufacturing businesses with average annual receipts of $7.5 million or less will qualify as small businesses. Third, a small business contractor will need to register in the federal government's System for Award Management, or SAM. And finally, a small business contractor will need to ensure that it complies with all the laws and regulations that apply to federal government contractors. Contracting with the federal government is very different than contracting with a private party, and it's imperative that all federal government contractors familiarize themselves with the unique compliance requirements contained in the Federal Acquisition Regulation. I highlight these basic requirements because eligibility is an area where we often see issues arise, and avoiding simple mistakes concerning the eligibility requirements and the registration requirements is an easy strategy for success. Next slide, please. There are several different methods or types of contracting that are in place to help small businesses increase their chances of winning an award. Understanding these methods, like understanding the basic eligibility requirements, is also an easy strategy to ensure success. First, as noted earlier, the government sets aside a certain percentage of federal contracts exclusively for small businesses. This is required when at least 2 or more small businesses can perform the work or provide the products being purchased by the government. With few exceptions, this happens automatically for all government contracts under $150,000. While most set-aside contracts are competitive, meaning all qualified small businesses are eligible to compete for them, there are sometimes exceptions to this rule where the government will award a contract without a competitive bidding process. This usually happens in situations where only a single small business can fulfill the requirements of a contract and is referred to as a sole source award. Next, certain federal contracts are further reserved for small businesses in certain socioeconomic categories. One of the most common government contracting programs is the 8A Business Development Program. The 8A Business Development Program is a business assistance program for small disadvantaged businesses. The 8A Business Development Program offers a broad scope of assistance to firms that are at least 51% owned and controlled by socially and economically disadvantaged individuals. To be eligible to participate in the 8A Business Development Program, a business owner must have a net worth of $250,000 or less, personal income of $250,000 or less, and the fair market value of all assets must be $4 million or less. Next slide, please. Other government contracting programs include the Hub Zone program, which has certain residency requirements, the Veteran-Owned Small Business and Service-Disabled Veteran-Owned Small Business programs, which are VA and SBA programs for veterans, and the Women-Owned Small Business and Economically Disadvantaged Women-Owned Small Business programs, which are programs for women where they have been historically underrepresented in the particular NAICS codes. Finally, I want to briefly touch on joint ventures, specifically the All Small Mentor Protege program, which was established in 2016. The All Small Mentor Protege program allows companies to form a specific type of joint venture relationship to enhance the capability of protege firms by requiring approved mentors to provide business development assistance to those firms and improve the firm's ability to successfully compete for federal contracts. Again, understanding the different methods and types of contracting, which generally limits the amount of competition that a small business will face, allows a small business to target certain opportunities and increase their likelihood of success. Next slide, please. You can also increase your chance of winning a government contract by researching the federal marketplace and taking advantage of the resources that are publicly available. First, there are a number of databases you can use to find federal contracts to bid on, either as a prime contractor or as a subcontractor. Federal business opportunities for prime contractors are listed at beta.sam.gov, beta.sam.gov. Government agencies are required to use BetaSAM to advertise all contract opportunities over $25,000. The Dynamic Small Business Search, or DSBS, is a database maintained by the Small Business Administration that government agencies use to find small business contractors for upcoming contracts. Small businesses can also use DSBS to find other small businesses to work with. And finally, Subnet, SUBNET, is a database of subcontracting opportunities hosted by large contractors looking for small businesses to serve as subcontractors. All of these are great resources for finding different government contracting opportunities, either as a prime contractor or as a subcontractor. Next, you should consider marketing directly to the government and/or to another contractor. You can do this by learning what the government agencies or prime contractors need, and then showing them how your business can fulfill that need. Some available resources include the Federal Procurement Data System. The FPDS Next Generation is the repository of all federal contracting data for contracts over $25,000. With this system, you can see which agencies have contracts and with whom they have contracts. You can see what agencies buy, and you can see which contractors currently have contracts, so you can reach out to them. Another available resource are the small business offices. Many federal agencies have an Office of Small and Disadvantaged Business Utilization, or OSDBU, or an Office of Small Business Programs, OSBP, and these offices work to identify opportunities to contract with small businesses. Finally, each agency releases a procurement forecast that includes contracting opportunities for small and disadvantaged businesses. Once you've reviewed an agency forecast and use systems like the Federal Procurement Data System to identify opportunities at a specific agency, you can contact that agency's small business office. Also, each small business office regularly hosts training and networking events to help businesses identify contract opportunities. The majority of those are now online given the current pandemic, but you can certainly reach out to the different agencies and find out when they're doing those meetings via Zoom or whatever other platform they're using. Keeping yourself informed about the different opportunities in the federal marketplace is a great strategy for success and will help you tailor the opportunities that you're going to see. Next slide, please. Now that we know how to find government contracts and whether or not we're eligible to bid on those contracts, let's discuss a few common mistakes that contractors make when submitting their proposals. The best strategy for success when submitting an offer is to make sure you understand the requirements and submit a proposal that's fully compliant. We see this happen all the time. I recently had a client ask me if I would review their proposal because they were rejected for award. And so, we set up a time to do that. They emailed me a copy of the proposal, and it took me about 5 minutes to find what the issue was. One of the requirements that they were required to submit with their proposal was the resumes of key personnel. And instead of submitting the resumes of key personnel, they put in their TBD. And so it is imperative that we understand the requirements and we submit proposals that are fully compliant. Some common mistakes that contractors make, we need to make sure that we read the solicitation to include all the clauses that are incorporated by reference to make sure that we fully understand what those clauses are and that we can be fully compliant. We need to make sure that we follow the solicitation's submission instructions. We were recently involved in a bid protest where our client was supposed to submit 25 pages When we submitted 27 pages, the last 2 pages weren't considered. So it's imperative that we follow the solicitation submission instructions. We need to make sure that we read and acknowledge all amendments to the solicitation. We recently had another client of ours who failed to acknowledge all of the amendments, and they drastically changed the way that the proposal was going to be submitted. It was readily apparent that the government wanted to make award to this client. However, they couldn't because we didn't acknowledge all the amendments to the solicitation, and that became a big problem for our client. And finally, always submit your proposal on time. I know that one sounds pretty self-apparent, but allow yourself enough time to make sure that you can get your bid or your offer in on time. And we see this happen a lot of times with sealed biddings, particularly if it's an in-person opening where the contractor has to get access to the federal installation. Allow yourself enough time to number one, get access to the installation, and number two, to be able to ensure that you're in the right place at the right time to be able to submit your proposal. Next slide, please. After a contract's awarded, you should be prepared to defend the award if you're the awardee, or challenge the award if you are a disappointed offeror and you think that the award was unfairly made. For some reason, contractors are often hesitant to challenge the government's source selection decision because they think that it will somehow reflect negatively upon them. In my experience, that's not usually the case if there's a valid reason for protesting. When I was working for the federal government, there was one case where a contractor quite literally protested every single solicitation, and they were known as a serial protester, and the contracting officers frowned upon that particular company. However, if you have a legitimate reason for filing some type of protest, you should exercise that right if you think that the source selection decision wasn't fairly made. Some different types of protests that you might consider are a NAICS code appeal if you believe the government used the wrong NAICS code. These are handled by the SBA, Office of Hearings and Appeals, and must be submitted within 10 days after the solicitation is issued. And we've seen recently the way the government's reorganizing and restructuring some of their procurements, where they're moving things from one NAICS code to another. So please be cognizant of the timeline for doing that. It's within 10 days after the solicitation is issued. You can also consider a size or status protest if you believe the awardee did not qualify for the set-aside, or the awardee is no longer eligible for the award. Size or status protests need to be submitted to the contracting officer no later than 5 business days after award, and then the contractor will forward those to the SBA Office of Hearing and Appeals, and you should receive a decision fairly quickly. Non-responsibility determinations. If a contracting officer rejects a low bid from a small business because of questions about that business's ability to fulfill the contract, the case must be referred to the SBA, and this is key. The SBA will then offer the small business a chance to apply for a certificate of competency, and if the small business applies for a certificate of competency, the SBA will review the business's ability to fulfill the contract. If the business demonstrates the ability to fulfill the contract, the SBA will issue the certificate of competency to the contracting officer and will require the award of the contract to that small business. Oftentimes, you see non-responsibility determinations are couched in bid protests, and it's a great ground to defend your award by saying that it should have been the contracting officer should have referred it to the SBA for a COC, and we see that quite a bit when we have a non-responsibility determination. And finally, you should consider bid protests if you believe that the contracting officer did not evaluate your proposal in accordance with the stated evaluation criteria. There are really 3 different levels of bid protest. The first is at the agency, the second is at the GAO, and the third is at the Court of Federal Claims. There's different timelines for each one of these different forums. I'm generally not a fan of the agency level protest unless the error is obvious on its face, because you're generally just protesting to the contracting officer who made the award. I'm a big fan of the GAO. They have a pretty formal process. It's pretty quick and easy to get into the GAO, and if you do so in the appropriate time, you can also get an automatic stay of performance. And then lastly, there's the Court of Federal Claims. The Court of Federal Claims is a much more formal process, and in my experience, formal equates to cost. Those protests are defended by the Department of Justice and follow very rigid rules, although a partner of mine is a big fan of the Court of Federal Claims protest because it allows full and open discovery, which allows you to find other protest grounds. But the bottom line is do not be afraid to use the tools that are available to you to protect your award if you're the winner, or to challenge an award if you think that the award was unfairly made. Next slide, please. So to be successful, you have to understand the rules that govern federal procurements. First, regulations dealing with government contracting programs for small businesses are outlined in Title 13, Part 125 of the Code of Federal Regulations. The government's purchasing process is governed by the Federal Acquisition Regulation, or the FAR, and some government agencies also have their own supplement to the FAR. For example, the Department of Defense has the DFARS. So we need to be fully compliant with all the Code of Federal Regulations. We need to be compliant with the Federal Acquisition Regulation, and then we need to be compliant with any of the Federal Acquisition Regulation supplements. As a government contractor, you also have to comply with the different labor standards statutes, such as the Service Contract Act, the Safety Standards Act, etc., as well as other statutes, unless the contract states that a particular statute isn't applicable. You should read and understand the contract provisions that also protect the integrity of the government procurement process. These include provisions like the anti-kickback provisions, organizational conflict of interest provisions, and many more. And you need to look for these clauses in any contract that the government provides. Next, under set-aside award contracts, small business prime contractors are required to perform minimum levels of work on a government contract. These limitations ensure that otherwise ineligible businesses don't use smaller disadvantaged businesses to gain access to set-aside contracts. These limitations vary depending upon whether the contract is for services, supplies, or construction. And finally, contractors supplying goods to the government should be aware of the non-manufacturer rule. In most cases, contractors supplying goods to the government are required to perform at least 50% of the cost of manufacturing those goods. The non-manufacturer rule is an exception to that requirement, which allows a small business to supply products it did not manufacture, as long as those products come from another small business. Again, understanding the governing rules and your responsibilities as a contractor is going to be key to your success as you navigate small business set-asides. Next slide, please. Let's talk about some key provisions in a government contract. First, it would be the specifications. It's imperative that you read and understand the specifications and what you're going to be providing. Second is the delivery date, delivery place, and any inspection and testing requirements. The third key element, in my opinion, is the changes clause. This is going to be if you're performing work and there's a change of some type where you think work is outside the scope of your contract, it's imperative that you follow the requirements in the changes clause so that you can later pursue some kind of request for equitable adjustment. The other provisions here are termination, and I think the termination provision relates right back to the number one, the specification, and number two, the delivery. And then finally, payment. Understanding what you're required to do and when you're required to do it is essential to successful performance. Equally important to each of your businesses is understanding how and when you're going to get paid. Next slide, please. Now that we know you've been awarded a government contract, let's discuss a few common mistakes that contractors make during performance. And please note that this list is not all inclusive. First and foremost, be sure to deliver on time as required by the delivery schedule. And if you can't deliver on time, make sure you notify the contracting officer in advance. Most times, contracting officers are willing to work with companies to ensure that the product is delivered, and if the company experiences some kind of delay, there's usually a way to resolve that short of termination. I recently had a client who was supposed to deliver some machinery to the Air Force in England. There's obviously an issue right now with the pandemic. We wrote a letter to the contracting officer, notified her that we would be late with delivery, and she was perfectly comfortable with that and extended the period of performance. But the key is to notify the contracting officer in advance. If you believe there's a change to the terms and conditions of the contract, you should immediately notify the contracting officer in writing. This notification requirement is one of the biggest issues that arise in any kind of dispute or appeal to the different boards of contract appeals. Largely, there's a thing called constructive notice. I do a lot of appeal work, and we did just see an appeal that had some problems with regards to the notice. So if you believe there's a change to the terms or conditions of your contract, immediately notify the contracting officer in writing just to preserve that right to pursue the request for equitable adjustment at a later time. Third, you should never incur costs before a modification is signed by the contracting officer. If the contracting officer doesn't subsequently approve the modification, you're going to be out of pocket, and also it impacts your ability to negotiate a price for the modification. Once the work is performed, the government's less likely to negotiate a price on that, and you could be harmed because you may not be able to recover all of your costs for performing that modification. You should also assert your right to an equitable adjustment in a timely manner. So as soon as there's some kind of change to the contract and you believe that you should be paid more, you should notify the contracting officer that you're going to submit an equitable adjustment. And you need to be particularly cautious about this when you're submitting any kind of pay application or signing any kind of modification, because those usually contain broad waiver and release language. You should also be cognizant that we have 6 years under the Contract Disputes Act to submit a certified claim, and the request for equitable adjustment usually precedes that. So allow yourself enough time to assert your right if you feel like you need to recover money for some kind of government-caused, some kind of change or government-caused damages. Next slide, please. So how do we handle disputes? We just talked about the changes clause. Typically what we like to do is we like to file a request for equitable adjustment with the contracting officer and try to negotiate that as part of contract administration. We do that because you're allowed to recover your consultant fees and attorney's fees if they're directly related to contract administration, and then trying to resolve an equitable adjustment is just that. If you're unsuccessful with your request for equitable adjustment, you can file a certified claim. There are certain requirements for certified claims, but essentially what a certified claim does is it starts the clock running on the government. Once you file a claim, the government has 60 days to issue the contracting officer's final decision, and then you have 90 days to either accept the contracting officer's final decision or appeal that to one of the boards of contract appeals, or alternatively, you have 12 months to appeal the contracting officer's final decision to the Court of Federal Claims. And lastly, there's the appeal process. If you receive a contracting officer's final decision that you disagree with, you have different avenues that you can take to try to recoup those costs. And again, there are several boards of contract appeals or the Court of Federal Claims, both of which have different timelines. Next slide, please. What are some things that a small business should consider as they plan for future growth? First, I would recommend that you search for and team with large businesses. This is important because it's gonna help you see how large businesses operate. It's going to get you connections within the large business community, and that sets you up for success to receive future subcontracts. You should bid on contracts that are not set aside for small businesses. Again, once we go through that process and we have these 23% of all awards that are set aside, you're competing against a smaller pool. And as you grow, you should increase the amount of contracts that you bid on that are not set aside for small businesses, just to see really how you compete against the large businesses, and to see if you can get some large business awards. Third, you should find a large business mentor to help teach, coach, and mentor you and help grow your business. And then finally, if you're in a program where you're going to graduate, you should establish a foundation to become a mentor so that you'd be eligible either through the All Small Mentor Protege program or through some kind of joint venture to bid on small business awards. Contracting with the federal government provides many opportunities for small businesses. Understanding how small business set-asides work and knowing how to handle the issues that can arise during formation and performance will greatly increase your chance for success. Again, my name is Tim Fern from the law firm of Ward & Berry in Washington, D.C. Thank you for joining us today. I hope that you have a better understanding about small business set-asides and some strategies that you can use to be successful. I'm happy to answer any questions that you have and can be reached at tim@wardberry.com. Thank you for attending.
Thank you, Tim, for a great presentation and sharing your time with us today. And thank you to everyone who joined us. The recording will be on our website and YouTube channel within the next 24 hours. And please join us this Friday as we cover each part of the FAR, and join us next Wednesday for more hot topics in federal contracting.